sip of coffee here before you start because e-scouting is always done better with a little caffeination. So in today's video, we kind of wanted to walk you guys through start to finish our process for picking a new piece, looking at it on a map, e-scouting it, and then actually going and hunting it. And obviously there's a lot of things that get involved in that. And you know, this wouldn't be possible without a tool like OnX. Really makes the learning curve so much faster, makes it kind of just gives you the ability to really go and do something like this. OnX gives you those property lines that are so critical when you're looking at a new piece of public. You used to have to, you know, go get the maps or order the maps online and have those sent to your door. And now a much quicker, easier process. For those of you guys that may be thinking about a trip or whatever and are looking to do this, I highly recommend going to the OnX playlist on their YouTube channel. They've got a lot of quick tutorials if you're new to that kind of stuff. But you know, right now it's a super important thing because it essentially allows you to create this hunt or create this experience. It gives you a destination, it gives you the detail, it allows you to potentially be successful and really quicken the learning curve on, say, a new piece of public. So let's look at what kind of scouting gets done essentially before you even pick a piece. You know, things to consider are definitely drive time. You know, are you willing to drive 4, 5, 6 hours to get to better hunting, or do you need to keep within a 2 or 3 hour loop of your house? For this particular trip, we felt comfortable driving about 4 hours. So that gave us the opportunity to hunt this piece not only for this trip, but go back and repeat missions throughout the fall. If we were to happen to tag out here in Ohio, we can simply, you know, get up one in the morning, head south to Kentucky, and be hunting another state that morning. The other thing before like zeroing in on an area and looking for a piece that I think is important is looking at big cities, big metropolitan areas. Obviously there's key like freeways and arteries in and out from those people population masses. And that's something I really try to avoid in general when hunting public land. I want to get away from people because that is probably the #1 factor for a Midwest whitetail hunter, especially in the states that are a little more population dense. Once you really start working your way east of the Mississippi, you get a lot, you know, bigger cities, more people per square mile goes up dramatically, even from state to state as you work your way east of the Mississippi. Let's talk about time e-scouting and the process there. After you've considered those kind of big picture parameters, I like to look at either a piece or maybe an area with 2 to 3 pieces I can get to. I've kind of zeroed in that general area and then it begins the e-scouting and picking a place. In this particular scenario, we've picked a piece of public that we feel is adequate in size, something that's over a couple hundred acres. I think it can absorb some hunting pressure. We also have picked a place where there are a few other pieces of public within the vicinity that after, say, 2 days on it, we can kind of pull the plug if need be. I think that's an important aspect of picking a new piece is you can't become emotionally attached until you really know what's there and if it's good. Last year in Indiana, for example, we pulled the plug because we just felt, meh, it wasn't that good, and found a much better piece and got on to better hunting later. So after you've picked a piece, I like to spend roughly 3 to 4 hours combing through it, and that's not all at once. I like fresh eyes. I like to do it in the morning when I'm a little more jacked up, and I think I'm sharper then. And obviously a new day brings new perspective, but a couple kind of things that I do is I will e-scout the whole piece with just a topo line on. You know, looking for terrain features, looking for features that I'm interested in. In this particular hunt, we're going in mid-ish, early September, and you know, a big pinch point isn't necessarily going to do me much good. It's not a rut time of year where these bucks are getting concentrated by a bunch of terrain features. But I will be looking at terrain in the aspect of, does it create hills to avoid other hunters? Does it kind of favor some western to southwesty type buck bedding type points, you know, where there's a nice point that if that wind's coming out of the southwest, which it can do a lot this time of year, it sets up well for buck bedding, especially in, we'll get into some of the details later, and I'll give you some specific examples of places I've highlighted. But you know, does it favor a movement from bed to food based on that point? So those are a couple things like I do as far as the topo lines are concerned on my map. Now I will repeat the same process with the hybrid mode. I think I can see enough with the hybrid mode, which is showing both the topo and aerial kind of overlay. If I need to really get a crispy image or whatever, I will zoom in and take off the topo lines. May even go ahead and throw that into Google Maps as well, just to get a good grasp of the picture. So I will do that. Oh, I will sweep the place and drop pins. I'm sweeping the place and I'm dropping pins. And what I'm kind of ideally looking for is areas where a topo and an aerial, I drop pins or points of interest, and they're within a close distance of each other, or you know, they're playing on top of one another. It's like a combo factor there when I'm e-scouting. Something else I like to do, and this is kind of a final step for e-scouting that I like, is I actually take the public landlines off and I simply just look at the place from a big picture. I feel when you keep those public landlines on there, you're constricted, and sometimes there may be a ridge or a point of interest that if you didn't have the lines, you may like it, say, at a 9 out of 10, versus with the lines, you think it's more like a 5 out of 10. That does happen. You may pick up on a saddle that looks phenomenal, but the public may only own a half of it, or you know, get a feature going into the saddle, and that's something that I do like to at least have notes on before I go.
Here's another example of what I'm looking at on a map. Got a nice point here. Access is kind of hard to get into. If I back out, you can kind of see it a little more. But this particular big point intrigues me as far as it looks like a decent area with a west wind. If it was south, I think they would kind of move around to this area here. But I think these deer are probably going to be bedding up on this point and working their way to these ag fields here to the south. Clearly, this wouldn't set up well if I had a south wind for an evening hunt. But you can see here there's some fingers of something that can be glassed from the road, so I can know what it is before making the attack. Now this point here is interesting. You can kind of see there's a little vegetation type change, and if you look actually at the topo, it sits in a hogback, you know, and then there's a subtle-ish type saddle effect going on here. So I could see deer, even if they don't, there may be a trail system, but I think they probably get pinched down right here, especially if this habitat is a thicker, clear-cutty. That could be a really nice ambush point, and could be something too with a thermal draw. Depending on wind speed, I could slip this crack up the last 45 minutes of daylight and just have downward thermals just running down this crack, and be in a position to ambush anything that might be bedded over here working its way to the south.
Now, something we have done that I do kind of recommend somebody poking around and trying to find is any sort of forestry detail maps. Stuff that will give you any sort of habitat improvements, food plots, crop rotation notes, burn notes. Those pieces of information sometimes are hidden gems, and maybe they're not even on the wildlife, you know, website. They're on the forestry website, so it is something you have to dig to go find. In this case, we have found it, and what I did then was actually look at that map, look at my OnX, my previous pins that I've marked through the process I just described, and see if I could kind of correlate, hey, this area actually has X, Y, and Z from the forester map. And that forester map, I was simply interested in timber harvest and burns. I'm looking for cover. I'm looking for areas of high stem count. I also glanced a little bit at oaks, just to maybe look for areas where those two may be close together. You know, I have personally seen bucks get out of a thicket because now they're hard-horned, at least by the time I'm going. They're hard-horned, they come out of a thicket, browse on some oaks, and either pop back into the thicket, or that those oaks could be a destination before they get to, say, a main type food source. And if those things are close together, he may move there in daylight and allow me an opportunity, I feel. Seen it firsthand.
So this is an area that really intrigues me. It's kind of like a bowl system, a couple nice points that I could see deer using. Um, the flat shelf here is interesting. There's also a creek running, and my thought with this creek is I could check for tracks and good crossings pretty easily. I've got a couple of hogbacks. This one's looks like pretty hard. This one's subtle, and there's a real subtle one right here that could be nice too. And my thought is this would be a pretty nice evening scout because I could check these for tracks and hard crossings here. And then if I flip this over, as far as the hybrid mode, you can see there's some sort of field going on over here that could be hay, could be alfalfa, could be something really nice. As far as access to this particular section, it's decently far. My thought is you got a couple points here that can kind of work that bedding. South wind, they may be somewhere over here. This point here, I think, is an anchor because it kind of jets out. I could see it getting a real good thermal pull. Everything, you know, he sits right here. He might be able to smell the entire area and have good visual of this whole hillside. Anything coming off this flat, anything coming across the creek. That might be number one for this trip as far as a potential buck bed. And I don't have the most experience hunting buck beds. I think I've shot one of my bucks within 100 yards of his bed, but you know, I'm more in that learning process right now with my buck bedding tape hunting.
You know, I think a huge aspect to e-scouting is access. And I probably should have mentioned this first and foremost, number one, off the bat, because in the whitetail public land game that I've kind of seen in a few different states, it's about getting away from people for the most part. That's kind of the habitat can be phenomenal, but if it's getting wrecked every day by people, it's simply not going to hold the deer. So, you know, I look for limited access on a public piece in general. But in this particular piece, I'm marking where I can see parking lots, pull-offs, maybe the ability to park on roads. That's something that, you know, on certain pieces, you are limited to parking lots, which I actually prefer. But I'm also looking for areas that either you got to go straight up off a parking lot or a road, or areas that start high, you got to go down and back up. Because not many guys look at a piece and they're like, man, I don't want to shoot a deer there and pull it out, because most guys can't. It's a lot of work to pull a solid deer, even a doe, up and down some hills.
So about to make up some quesadillas to essentially freeze and take with me, and all I got to do is heat those up. I'm going to bake them in the oven, and that way in camp I can fire up the burner and just like heat both sides. I've already done a venison roast, like almost like a rice bowl type meal. Now, I'm not Rachel Ray, I'm not Emerald Lagasse, I just try and make some quick meals, but you know, I do hit them with a pow pow.
Now, obviously, I'm going on this trip in mid-September, and it's not a rut game. It's a bed-to-food type pattern that I will be hunting, so I am a lot of times looking zoomed out. Okay, can I see any sort of agriculture fields, hay fields, strips of, you know, potentially clover, and then I will look where those are. And a lot of times those seem to be located on the private, surrounding a public. Maybe it's an edge, maybe it's a corner of the public touches a little more ag. And those are definitely areas of interest. But I love stuff that is, you know, public land, has the bedding, the habitat, the high points that a lot of these deer like, and it allows them to then feed onto the private, and you can kind of catch them in that transition, or if you're going to hunt the bedding area, you can catch them there as well. But that is like a traditional thing I look for when I e-scouted, and I have found that on this piece. Obviously, this time of year, beans are going to maybe still be hot, but also corn is now becoming a factor. You know, these deer now will be hard-horned, so they will be getting into the thickets. Traditionally, I have kind of seen more of these bucks in velvet hang out in less thicker type habitats. So I got that going for me. And then the other thing is rub lines. Going into this, once I get there, rub lines, because they're not old. They're literally 5 days old, maybe 7 days old. You know, it's something that's within the week, and so I'm very excited to be looking at that. I will have to spend the time once I get there to really scout out the areas, as far as like a perimeter type drive, because a field sometimes on an aerial you can't tell what exactly it is. You can't tell if it's corn, beans, you can't tell if it's alfalfa, because that's another big food source that could be down there. Sometimes you can't even tell if it's a hay field or maybe the farmer didn't plant it. So before you would dive into, say, a bedding type point or something you suspect is a bedding type point, or a you know, kind of trying to catch deer, you kind of got to confirm the food source first and foremost. So it is a week before my adventure to Kentucky, and you know, I feel pretty prepared at this point. I've spent about 4 or 5 hours e-scouting. Andy is headed down there Monday, Tuesday. I have another buddy going over the opening weekend, so hopefully I can get some relayed information as far as what they're seeing. Things I've done here, I've prepped some food. I still have snacks and breakfast to kind of prepare. I need to be shooting my broadheads as much as I can at this point, get my clothes washed, and kind of have a little bit of camp prep and gear prep to get on the road and hunt, you know, next week. That's going to be my focus at this point. I think the e-scouting side of things is done. It's wrapped up. And something to consider is you don't know until you get boots on the ground. I feel e-scouting is a great starting point. I think it's valuable, but boots to ground is going to tell you what's going on in the piece. And I've only marked, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas of interest. I don't even know if I'll get to those within a 2.5, 3 day period. It's just not possible sometimes to get to all your marked locations, especially if you find something good. Don't leave deer to go hunt a question mark, I think is a good aspect to think about when you're looking at this type of hunt where you don't have all the information, you don't have years of scouted experience. So yeah, other than that, I think it's going to be a cool adventure. We plan to bring it to you from our eyes, and kind of continue to talk about, you know, the scouting versus what we're seeing boots to ground, and hopefully we can lay a deer down. I haven't decided if I'm going to shoot a doe maybe later in the hunt, at least for this opening type adventure down there. But it should be a good time. Hoping to get on something. I think it's something that at least will, you know, develop my skills as a hunter too. Enjoy. Thanks for watching.